Urban Indian Health. I'm here today with Tony Scucci, and we're going to participate in the presentation Part 5, the concluding part of the series for the Board of Directors Training, Advisory Boards, and Youth Councils. I have a special note for everyone today. We are going to begin issuing certificates of completion for these trainings, both the executive directors and the board of directors. So at the end of this presentation, you'll see a slide with a code. That code corresponds with this particular training. If anyone is interested in receiving a certificate of completion for this training, please follow the instructions that are located on the slide, and we will get that out to you promptly. That's it for now. You can go ahead and take it away, Tony.
Great. Thank you, Chelsea. I appreciate all your support on this, and I want to welcome everybody. Everyone's having a good afternoon. My name's Tony Scucci, and as Chelsea was just saying, this is concluding one of the series of webinars that we've been doing on a monthly basis. And these webinars are really designed around what members of the various urban programs around the country were suggesting they needed in terms of topics around different kinds of training for boards and for staff. So that's how we've developed these. And at the end of this, as we usually do, there'll be a link to an evaluation form as well. And I would encourage you to please take a few minutes and give us some feedback on on today's webinar. And also, if you have any ideas for future topics, that'd be a good place to suggest them as well. Finally, let me just say in terms of introductions that on this opening slide, you'll see down here on the bottom right of your screen my email address. I welcome anybody to contact me anytime with questions, anything following up on this webinar, any issues going on where you think I might be of some help to you. That's my email address. It's the best way to reach me. I respond to all my emails within 24 hours, so please send one to me if you would like to, and I would be glad to do what I can. Today's webinar topic is on advisory boards and youth councils, and this topic came up, I think, because there are quite a few urban programs that have had various kinds of advisory groups or youth councils, all different kinds of different names and different purposes. Some of the programs have had some success with them, some have not. So it seemed like it would be a worthwhile topic to dig into a little more if you have such a group or groups, or if you're considering starting one, or if you had one and it's become defunct and you're going to restart it. I think this webinar will help inform some of your thinking and the decision making in that process. So our objectives for today are there are three objectives. One is that we're hoping we can distinguish between governing boards and all these other boards. And I put boards in quotes because one of my, even despite what the title slide says, advisory boards, I'm a believer in being cautious and thoughtful about the words that we use. And it's often confusing when we use words like boards for a lot of different things. So I try, for the most part, to encourage folks to think about a board as a board of directors or a governing board. And when you're creating some other kind of group, an advisory group or a task force, to think of some other terms that might be more accurate in describing who they are and what they do. So one of our objectives today is to distinguish between those governing boards and all these other kind of groups. Another objective is to really look at strategies for how you might get started with one. How do you recruit members? What are some ways to ensure that you have good member participation? And what are the kind of things you need to think about if you're going to put an advisory group or a youth council in place in terms of maintaining or sustaining it? And then third objective really is to look at, as you bring those groups together, what are some ways you can get more value out of the meetings that you may have? So those are our three objectives, the things we're hoping for, hoping that we can accomplish in this next hour. As I lay out the agenda, our roadmap for today, we've done our welcome and introductions and kind of an overview. We will come up with a couple of working definitions for what we're talking about as we proceed in this webinar. And spend a little time talking about the rationale for creating an advisory group. And again, we'll think about an advisory group as a generic term. If you have a youth council or an advisory board or whatever it might be, that will probably use the term advisory group just in a generic sense for the purpose of this webinar. We'll look at ways that these advisory groups can bring value, and if they're bringing value now for your organization, maybe there are ways to bring even greater value. Things you might consider if you are going to create an advisory group, or perhaps if you're going to recreate an advisory group. And then we'll evaluate the session. Again, there'll be a link at the end for you to go to give us some feedback about this session and to what extent it met your expectations, and also for any ideas you may have for future topics. So that's our roadmap for this next hour. Start first by just defining what it is we're talking about. So when we use a term, or when I use a term, board of directors, I'm talking about a governing body, and it's comprised for the most part of key stakeholders or stewards. Boards have a stewardship role, and so that's why we use terms like trustee or governor or board of directors. Board of directors is responsible for protecting the assets of the organization, ensuring its sustainability, and making sure that everything the organization does is aligned with its mission. It's the ultimate authority. The board of directors is, in a sense, where the buck stops. The board has the authority to steer, to control, to influence, to make decisions on behalf of the organization. So that's a definition of working board, of a board of directors. Under a board of directors, you may have standing board committees, and these are comprised of board members exclusively. A standing board committee has some governing responsibilities, and it may have some authority if it's delegated by the board. And the nature of its responsibilities tend to be ongoing. That's why we use the term standing. And a good example of what a standing board committee is would be if you think about a conventional finance committee. It's comprised for the most part of board members. They have some governing responsibilities, perhaps in terms of developing a budget and financial oversight. They may have some authority if the board delegates it to them. Some finance committees, for example, have the authority to engage an external auditor to do an audit of your books every year. And the responsibilities are ongoing. A finance committee's work is ongoing. It doesn't begin in January and end in February. It's an ongoing workload. So that's how we would look at a board of directors and a standing board committee. An ad hoc board committee or task force is the same as a standing board committee, except that it's time limited in what it does. And an example of that may be a bylaws review committee. So there you have an example of bylaws haven't been reviewed in a while. The board may decide we should take a look at them, make sure they're revised and they're accurate and up to date, and they comply with all the requirements for our funders, for any legal requirements. You would pull together a small task force of folks to do that, and they would have a very beginning and a time limit, an ending, and it would be task oriented, and the job would be done. If you think about the notion of a task force, and we're talking about a volunteer group of individuals charged with accomplishing a particular goal. And they're typically time limited, and an example of that would be a fundraising event. So you may have a committee that gets together, a task force, to do a fundraising event. That's an example of that. Today's discussion is going to focus on advisory boards or advisory groups or advisory councils, whatever, any term you may use. And to differentiate that from all the other kind of governing responsibilities would be that we'd be looking at a voluntary group of individuals, and they provide a specialized service, expertise, or perspective. They may have ongoing responsibility, so it may not be time limited. It may be a group that you convene on a regular basis with no particular beginning or ending. It's just ongoing. But they do not have any governing responsibilities or authority for the most part. So these are people that you would bring together to give you some advice, to help you solve some problems, to do a particular project for you. But their work is really pretty much hands-on, task kind of oriented, and much more around programs and managing rather than the governing of the organization. So that's how I would distinguish amongst those. And this one, advisory groups, is what we'll be focusing on today. So here's another definition of an advisory group. Again, it's a volunteer group. For the most part, these are people who come together on their own time. They're individuals who come together because they have a special service or skill, expertise, or perspective, and they can bring that to advance the mission of the organization. So what we call this group does matter. It's important that whatever group you have or may be considering creating, that you give it a name that really does reflect what's the scope of work. What are we asking this group to do? I have found in my practice a lot of times people will make reference to an advisory board, and I'll ask, well, what kind of advice do they give you, or who do they advise? And it often turns out that they aren't providing advice at all. They're doing some other things perhaps, but they're not really advising. When I think about an advisory board or an advisory group, I'd be thinking about people with a particular expertise in a particular field, and they're going to give you advice. So if you were thinking about developing a new health care service, you might bring together people who have medical backgrounds and healthcare finance backgrounds, people with specialized expertise to get their best thinking. Another way that you might see advisory groups used is at think tanks. You bring together a group of people that you want to get their best thinking about an idea or to help you solve a problem. So what you call it matters, and the more accurate you can be in its description, the better. And the other thing in terms of its name is giving it a name that really does inspire engagement. I recall working with a group in Connecticut, a statewide organization, and their mission was around child abuse prevention. And they had an advisory group that they brought together 4 times a year, and they called themselves something like Champions for Children. So they didn't say they were like the Connecticut Child Abuse Advisory Group. They called themselves a name that was kind of interesting to them and engaging as a way to identify who they are and what they do and its connection to the mission. So that's an example when I think about using a term like inspires engagement. What you call it does matter. This next slide, there are 4 questions I would ask you to ponder as we go through the webinar, and I would invite your comments or thoughts. You can enter them into the chat box on your window. There's a little window that says chat, I believe, and you could type them in there. But I'd be curious to know what your experiences are with advisory groups. If you have an advisory group, to talk a little bit about how it brings value to your work and to your organization. If you've ever had challenges with an advisory group, it would be helpful for folks if you could share some of those with us, and things that you may have learned from your experiences. So I would invite everyone on the webinar, just kind of ponder these questions, and if you have some thoughts and would like to respond to these, I would welcome those responses. I appreciate that it's a little awkward that we can't have a conversation, but certainly if you have some comments or thoughts or examples you'd like to share, please do use that chat box. And I would ask Chelsea to make sure that if I don't see the chat box, that if you could bring those questions or comments to me, Chelsea, I'd appreciate it. So those are questions for you to ponder and think about as we proceed throughout. I wanted to share with you, because when I put these questions out, I then asked myself a question and these questions and thought about what's an example of an advisory board that I've had. And so here's an experience of mine I'll share with you as an example. And this is an organization, this goes back quite a while now, but it was a Literacy Volunteers organization. And Literacy Volunteers, as you probably know, their work is about helping people become more literate. And they received funding to do a special kind of program to help parents teach their children to read. And these are parents who do not read very well themselves. So the idea was for children and parents to kind of learn together. So they got a grant to do this. And part of the requirement for their grant was that they had to have a community group, a mix of people from the community group who would come together to give them advice. I think the rationale behind that was they wanted to make sure that the program was close to the people they serve. And because they were serving people in the community, having a kind of a community advisory group would give them credibility. So the funder's requirement was that they have this in place. It was part of their contract. At the same time, it wasn't really specific about how to do that. It simply said they should be getting guidance and advice from people in the community. So I was approached by the director of Literacy Volunteers, and he asked me if I would serve on this advisory group. And that's how I came to learn about this requirement. And I suggested to him that there were really 2 options for him to consider in asking me to come on. And one option is to simply pull together this group because it's a hoop you have to jump through. If the funder says do it, you just do it. And I suggested to him that if that's the reason he wants to do this, and if he wants me to serve on that kind of an advisory group, that I wasn't interested. I also encouraged him to think about another option, and that would be, is there a way you could do this, have this advisory group that would actually bring real value to the program, to this project, this literacy project, and do it in a way that honored the intention of the funder, because again, this was a requirement of the funder, and that also would be respectful of the individual members' times. I didn't want to spend time sitting with a group of people every month for 2 hours, having coffee and donuts, and just talking about things. I wanted to come together when there was something purposeful to be done. And so that's what I encouraged this executive director to do. And the end result of that is that he decided to convene a group, not on a monthly basis, because no one required that. He simply decided he would do it when it was necessary. And before he convened the group, he would make sure that he and his staff had framed some really important questions or issues that this group could advise or guide them on. And the end result of that is that this brought real value to the organization and to the people that it served. And I share this as my example because it's very easy to get locked into a mindset or a framework where, because a funder said you have to have something, that you simply go to the kind of default position that you may have done in the past. You need an advisory group, you bring people together and you give them food and you have them meet once a month. There really is, the sky is the limit on how you get guidance and advice and where you get it from and how you even think about it. And it reminds me of an old saying that I learned when I was in graduate school, strategy before structure. Always put the strategy before the structure. The strategy was to make sure that we're getting good feedback and in touch with the people in the community. That was the strategy. Well, the structure it came up with was a little bit of a variation on monthly meetings, that it really was a group that met when there was a reason to meet. So I'll talk now about some ways that advisory groups can bring value that I've seen in my experiences. One of the ways they can bring value is they can raise money. A lot of times people bring together groups to help them raise money. This is not giving advice, it's really raising money. Now you may be embarking on a fundraising plan, in which case you might want to bring together some people with expertise in fundraising and ask them for advice. It's a different kind of animal. Again, these are just some various ways in which you can have an advisory group and have it bring value. Making resource allocations recommendations. This happens very often with foundations. If you're familiar with the United Way, that's one of those organizations where they often have a committee or a team of people that make recommendations about how their funds are going to be allocated to different agencies in the community. You might bring together an advisory group because you want to survey the needs for a new program. If you were considering some kind of healthcare program, something that was new, you might want to bring together some folks in the community who know about that, who've been providing healthcare services, some people who are receiving healthcare services, and ask them what the needs may be and how you might address those needs. Conducting evaluation and oversight activities, that's another way that advisory groups can bring value. And again, they're not bringing advice here. They're helping you in terms of advising or providing oversight. Now, if you're starting a program and you want to begin evaluating it, you might bring together for advice some people with some expertise in evaluation and use them again as that kind of a resource. Advisory groups are groups sometimes where the members serve as ambassadors. The example I used earlier about the Child Abuse Prevention Group in Connecticut, they're part of the responsibility of the members of that advisory group was to be ambassadors, to be good spokespeople for the organization, to get the word out about the work that it does. Building bridges with the community is another way you might utilize advisory groups. If you were engaging in a strategic planning process, you may bring together several groups of people from different parts of the community and involve them in helping you set the strategic direction of the organization. It would be a way to build bridges with the community. Providing perspective is another way that advisory boards or advisory groups can bring value. And the idea of using groups of people as a think tank, which I think is a really great idea, and where I've seen this used well, it really does work well. So if you're in a position where you've got a major problem you're trying to solve, or you're looking at some new ideas and you want some feedback, or if you're simply trying to generate some new ideas, bringing together some people who have particularly good thinking skills, people who may be kind of entrepreneurial in their thinking. These are folks that you might consider bringing on and using them as a think tank. So these are some examples of ways that advisory groups can really bring value. Some things you might consider before you actually start one, or if you're thinking about renewing one. The next couple slides will address that. And let me say that one of the ways to think about either creating or renewing some kind of advisory group would be to think about it in terms of it being an investment in a sense. There's a cost here. So you're going to invest some time and energy and resources in doing this work, in sustaining this group, and so you want to think about it in terms of an investment. When you think about it that way, then you also have to think about what will be the return on that investment. If I'm going to spend a certain amount of time and energy bringing people together, facilitating discussions, asking good questions, taking into account and consideration their ideas, their viewpoints, how much of a return on value am I going to get from that? So it's a way to think about it. Some basic questions you want to be absolutely clear about before you begin. What's the purpose of the group? And again, this word purpose will come up in this webinar, as it does in many webinars. Purpose is really important. People have to feel a sense of purpose. There has to be a purpose for the group. So what does this organization want to accomplish, and how is this group going to help do that? So whatever your organization is thinking about doing, if you're going to bring a group together to help you or guide you or advise you, what's the role that group is going to play? What will the organization expect the individual members of the group to do in order to achieve the purpose? So are you expecting people to come to meetings, to be available for a teleconference meeting, to be available one-on-one for some checking in or guidance? Whatever it is, to be really clear about that. What authority will the group have? For the most part, these kind of groups really do not have authority. But if you are going to consider giving them authority, that is the ability to make decisions on behalf of the organization, well, then you want to be really clear about what is the authority that you're giving them. To whom will this group report? That's another really good question. You know, is the group advising a particular staff person in your program? Is the group advising a program? Is the group advising the organization? Is the group advising the board of directors? These are all different kind of questions, so being clear about to whom will the group report. Who will have authority to select its members? How will this group come together? Who is going to have the authority to put this group of people together? Who will provide staff support to orient, educate, and work with the members of this group? Again, if you're going to bring people together, it's going to take some kind of support, for the most part, staff time, to orient people, to educate them about this work, how much time it will take, whose responsibility is it going to be for that. How will the organization recruit these folks? If you're going to bring people together, you've got to have a plan for how you're going to do the recruitment. How large should the group be to carry out its purposes? This is one of those questions where the size really depends on what its purpose is. If you want to bring together a large group of people to just pick their brains and have them be a good think tank for you, you can do that with a fairly large group. If you want a more intimate group, a group to help you deliberate over some issues, you may want a smaller kind of group. Again, the size would come after you determine what the purpose is. Size also would depend on the kind of variety or diversity you want to have in your group as well, because you need a certain number of people to have the kind of diversity you may seek. What's the nature of the relationship between the governing body, the staff, and the advisory group? So how is this group going to interact and fit with the board of directors and staff? What is the nature of that relationship? What's it going to look like? What are the financial costs? You know, there's a saying, there's no such thing as a free lunch. If you're going to bring together a group of people for any purpose, there are going to be some costs. What are the financial costs? It's something to consider before you begin. And this ties again closely to the notion of this being an investment and what will the return on that investment be? If it's going to cost you a certain amount of money with staff time to provide, to support this group and have this group accomplish its goals, we can weigh that against what will be the end result, and will that be worth the investment that we put into it. And to what extent are the chief executive and the governing board in favor of the advisory group? It's really important that the organization feels as if this is something that's important and needed, and this is a good way to address it. And then finally, there are often liabilities and risks involved. So it's another thing you might want to think about as you think about bringing together an advisory group. So those are just some considerations. As I think next to the next step, we'll talk about then how do you actually build this group. So if you have an advisory group already, you can look at this in the same way and see where you might fit into it. And I think about this as a kind of cyclical project, something that's cyclical. It's a building cycle. And we begin with identifying who are the people that we want to have on this particular advisory group. And then we think about how we're going to recruit those folks. They need to be oriented. They need to kind of get a sense of how they're going to fit in, who are the other people on this group or this team. They need to be involved, so you need to find a way to involve them in important and purposeful work. And then at some point you want to evaluate this group, and how did we do? Did we accomplish our goals? How did we work together as a team? And finally then to celebrate. When the job is done, it's the time to step back and say, okay, we did it, we accomplished it, let's celebrate, we're done. So as we think about the next few slides, what I'll do is to kind of just touch on each of these parts of this building cycle. So in terms of identifying, you've really got to ask the questions, what are the qualities and what are the qualifications you're looking for? And these are things like skill sets, and they're not necessarily just technical skill sets. You may be looking at other kinds of skills or other kinds of abilities. One of the things you might be looking for is perspective. You may be looking for just different viewpoints on a particular issue that you're dealing with. You may be feeling as an organization like you're so insulated, you want to get some viewpoints from people who are outside of your organization, outside of your circle. And connections. You know, sometimes the value that people bring is they can get you connected to other people and to other important resources. So as you think about the identifying part of the building cycle, you're looking at qualities and qualifications. Then you get to the recruitment. Where can we find the people with the qualities and qualifications that we seek? So where are we going to find these folks? And what are we asking these people to do? If you've heard me talk at all on any of these webinars, one of the things I'm big on is that people should have some kind of job description. If I'm going to be asked to serve on an advisory group of your organization, I want to know what the job is. Bringing value and feeling valued. People are glad to come and get involved and help out if it feels like they're making a real difference. So you have to make sure that it does. And collectively, what's the objective? So when you think about recruiting, you've got to be a clear sense of what are you asking individuals to do, and collectively, what are you asking this team of people to do? The next stage in the building cycle is the orientation. And this means bringing people into the group, and it means that they need to be oriented not just to the organization, but to the specific issue that this group may be dealing with, the issue that you're asking them to focus on. So it could be mission-related, program-related. It could be related simply to the sector or to the field. If you're looking at ways to better position your organization, given what's coming down the pike with the Americans, with the Affordable Care Act, you may bring together some experts who have expertise in the field of healthcare. So orientation has to be related to the mission, related specifically to the programs and to the field in which you're moving. Involving people. I mean, one of the best ways to involve people is to give them responsibility. The best way to get somebody involved is to give them something to be responsible for. That's the bottom line. And again, it ties back to people needing to feel a sense of purpose. If they're going to give up their time, if they're going to sit with others and give you guidance or advice, to feel like it really does matter, that they're making a difference. And you involve people by dividing the workload. Many hands mean the workload is lighter for each of one. Evaluating, how do we accomplish the objective? So at some point when your advisory group has its job completed, you want to ask the question, did we accomplish the mission, and how did we work together? Was this something that was enjoyable? Was it fun? Did I learn something from the people I worked with in this group? There are a lot of ways that people will benefit from participating and from giving. So these are some evaluative questions you might ask. And then the celebration part. Acknowledge that things were accomplished, thanking people for the work that they did, for their contributions, and then following up with them as may be required. So that's the celebration part, and it's a way to bring the project or the task to a conclusion, to an ending. And I'll talk in a minute, too, about some advisory groups do have beginnings and endings, and some may be ongoing in nature. And so we'll get to that in a few minutes and talk about those as well. There's something else to consider when you're comprising a group of people to give you guidance or advice or to do a particular project. And it's important to begin with by thinking about individuals and what their motivation is. What are their needs? What are their interests? If someone's going to come onto your group, you've got to understand what motivates them and what are their needs and interests, and you're going to do your best to make sure you can meet those. And there are ways that people benefit. And these are examples of ways in which people would benefit from being a member of an advisory group or a youth council. One is to be able to feel like they're making a difference, and that is fundamentally important. People come on because they might want to be recognized and appreciated. Not everybody does everything for totally altruistic reasons. So there may be some people who want to come on because they just want to be appreciated. It's important for you to figure that out, to know that, to make sure that they are appreciated for their contribution. There are people who will come on to different kinds of advisory groups or think tanks, not only because they feel like they have something to share, but they feel like they could learn something from the other folks that they work with. So another benefit would be for people to learn from each other. And there are the social benefits, and you probably have worked with folks who often get involved with things because they really have a social need. They just like to connect with people and come together around a project or an idea and feel like they're contributing to their community. And then I added on here, some people want to get onto these kind of advisory groups simply because they want to add to their resumes. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that. If that's a person's only motivation, that may be a little troubling. But that's simply just one of many other reasons why people might want to serve on your particular advisory group. And I lay these out there just again for your consideration as you think about bringing people on, trying to make sure that ultimately is the end of it is a win-win for everybody, that people feel like they brought value and that they feel valued. Advisory groups sometimes can be difficult to manage. And very often this is because they have a lot of responsibility but very little authority. And one of the ways I think about this is that you may bring together a group of people and ask for their opinions or their advice. If you ask for people's opinions and for their advice, you have to make sure that they know that you're considering it and that you may actually act on some of it. You don't necessarily have to take the advice, but you definitely have to make sure that you're communicating that you're accepting it. So you want to make sure, again, when you ask for opinions or advice, you do want to take them into consideration. And another way I think about this is that there really is a differentiator between power and authority. And power is simply sharing in the work. When you ask people to give you their best thinking about a particular issue, you're sharing power. But you're not asking them to decide what you're going to do about that issue, because that's the decision that you would ultimately make as a board or as an executive or a senior staff person. Advisory groups, as I said earlier, can be in the sense of two types. One would be a time limited, and one would be more kind of open-ended. And I thought it'd be good to just kind of define these as you think about if you're thinking about starting a group or if you have a group in place. And there's what else can I say about it? Okay, so let's just leave that for now and let's talk about time limited. Time limited, some of the implications for having a time limited group, it makes it easier for a person to make a commitment. If you said to me, I'd like you to serve on this group and we're going to meet 3 times over the next 3 months, that would be easier for me to commit to than if you said this is going to be an ongoing kind of group. Members know when the work is done. I mean, there's some kinds of projects, some kinds of activities really need to come to an end, and people need to know that it's done. The other beauty about time limited, and I'll tell you that my bias is towards time limited. I think it's for the most part the best way to set up almost any kind of group, and it doesn't preclude you from having a beginning and ending and then starting with a new beginning again. But it does allow for endings and for new beginnings. The work that you do may be ongoing, but serving shouldn't be a life sentence. The idea and the beauty of the time limit is you can ask people to come together for a period of time to do a certain thing that really matters and is important, will make a difference, and when it's done, we'll know that it's done. If there's a reason to reconvene the group, then we'll come together again. The other nice thing about time limited is that it allows for those kind of windows of letting people come in and leave. It allows for folks to join and to cycle off. Open-ended, by contrast, participants basically join anytime because the group is ongoing. And you have this institutional history. It's less likely to be lost because you've got people who are involved over long periods of time. Terms and term limits might also have to be considered because, again, you can't ask people to come on and serve a life sentence for any particular project. So just as a way for you to kind of think about as you're creating a group or you're thinking about a group, and again, sequentially, let me say the first thing is you've got to figure out what the strategy is and then come up with the best structure. What we're looking at here are 2 different kinds of structures, but the structure it doesn't get created until you're sure what the strategy is. And if your strategy requires you to have an ongoing open-ended group, then that's what you put in place. If the strategy suggests we ought to come together for a time limit in a limited time, then this is the kind of structure you might use. So those are 2 ways to kind of think about advisory groups. I thought it would be helpful, and I do this often with a lot of different issues, to look at characteristics of an effective advisory group. So if you look at a group that's really doing well, that's really effective, what are some of the characteristics of that group, and how might we apply those characteristics to the group we're in or we're considering? One of the characteristics of an effective group, it's clear about its charge. There's a common purpose. Everybody knows what the purpose is. Everyone involved is clear about what's the charge or what the charter is. This group is very clear about what's the job. What am I being asked to do or to accomplish? Membership is defined. You're very selective and strategic in comprising advisory groups. And the more strategic you are, the better. If you are looking, for example, at starting a youth advisory group, well, it seems to me that you probably are going to define that membership, for the most part, as exclusively or almost exclusively young people in a certain age range. And they're going to be defined that way. And you may be asking a youth group to serve the purpose of being your eyes and ears to the needs of young people in the community. So that membership is defined based on the strategy. It's comprised strategically. So you're looking not just, if we stay with the example of a youth council or a youth group, you're looking for individuals who are young people, obviously, but you want to get a mix of experiences, skills, and perspectives. What is the kind of mix that we're going to need so we can achieve the goals of this particular group? It has to be the right size. If it can't be too large or too small, and the size again goes back to the charge. And virtually everything goes back to the charge. What are we asking this group to accomplish? Full engagement of members. Everyone that participates has to be engaged. The implication is every person that we ask to serve has something important to bring, some value, some talent, and some gift. And we need to find a way to tap into that so that people feel like they're engaged and are engaged. Time that we spend together in doing this work, we're going to focus on things that really do matter. And this is really important, especially if you're thinking about things like a youth council or bringing younger people into your organization through some kind of advisory group. It really matters, particularly younger people, that the time they spend matters and it's making a difference. Members get to know each other as whole people. For a group to be effective, the members have to get to know each other, and that means we have to attend to how we orient folks, we have to attend to the relationships, we have to attend to how we bring people together, how we treat each other, to be always checking in, to make sure that we are being as inclusive as we can. But it's important that we think about these folks as whole people. So if you were thinking about a youth council, it's not just a bunch of young people together, but young people is one dimension. These are young people who have all different kinds of skills and experiences and perspectives and qualities, personal qualities. Paying attention to that is really important. Characteristic of an effective advisory group: motivated to get something done. If there isn't something important to get done, if there isn't a real purpose, the group will flounder. The atmosphere of meetings is conducive to dialogue, creating an environment where you welcome different opinions and viewpoints. Your meetings will be rich. People will share different viewpoints. There'll be lots of push and shove back and forth, and in very respectful ways. People will get to understand different opinions, and ultimately the decisions that you may make, the more diverse you are as a group, the more difficult to arrive at decisions, but ultimately the better decisions. And then there's a written record of all meetings. It's really important to make sure that you do keep a record of any kind of meetings. The work that any particular group may be doing is important, and if it's important, there should be a written record of it. And this, again, would fit with the charge. If this is a very formal kind of thing, you might want to have a formal set of minutes. If it's something that's less formal, you simply want some notes. You want to at least capture who was at the meeting, what were the major issues that were discussed, what were some of the ideas that came up, et cetera, et cetera. So it doesn't have to be overly formal or overly engineered, but having some record is a good idea. And it's also a way to make sure that when you go back and reference certain meetings, that there's clarity about what the group did talk about and what they did decide. Mutual accountability. Characteristics of effective groups: people hold each other accountable. You don't need a hand holder. You don't need somebody to be the person who is the person who holds everyone accountable. People hold each other accountable. So that's a characteristic of effective groups. And effective groups pay attention to how they're doing. So every now and again, you look at the performance and look at ways to improve that performance. So if you had a time-limited group, at the end of that time, when they've accomplished what they set out to do, evaluating that, looking at ways to do it better next time, any way that you can improve your process, evaluation is an important step. So those are some examples of characteristics of effective advisory groups. I also would ask you all if any folks have typed anything into the chat box. I can't see anything here, so I'm assuming there's no comments or questions at this point in time. Okay, and then I will move on to another slide, and this is a slide that really gets at something that I share with a lot of folks, and if you've been in any trainings I've done, you probably heard me talk about this, but if you're thinking about asking somebody to do a job, and you're thinking about the job description, if you're asking somebody to serve on a youth council or an advisory group, you've got to be able to answer the question, they have to be able to answer the question, what am I expected to do? And that really is the job description. So if you're starting a group, what does that job description look like? And you can think about a job description similar to what you know as a conventional job description. It would be the name of the job, there would be a summary of the duties and responsibilities, and then there may be a set of specific duties and responsibilities listed. And then what are the qualifications? You know, not everybody can do every job. The job description should list what are the qualities and qualifications. And who do I report to, etc. So thinking about a kind of general, conventional job description, that may be a good template as you think about asking somebody to serve on an advisory group. You're asking me to do something. What am I expected to do? Why is it important? And why is it important is a key question, because that's how it ties to your mission. And this is important because you're asking me to help you advance your mission if you're asking me to serve on an advisory group. I'm doing it because it matters, because it's going to make a difference. So tying it to the mission is really key. What authority do I have to do this job? Do I have any authority? If I have any authority, what is it? When I need help, where can I go? So if you're asking me to serve on this group, what kind of support and resources are going to be available to me and to this group so we can accomplish the tasks that we're set out to accomplish? And then how am I doing so far? The idea of ensuring that there's always ongoing feedback. People want to do whatever job they're doing. For the most part, they want to do it well. And one of the ways you do your job well and improve your job performance is to get continual feedback. Feedback from people who can look at how you're performing, and in a constructive way, give you some guidance, give you some feedback, so you can continue to improve. So when you think about a position serving on a youth council or advisory group, these are the 5 questions that every member needs to answer. The last slide that I put up here is to focus a little bit on meetings when you do bring people together, some things to consider. And you see, first of all, that the work that you're being asked to do is meaningful, that it's important, that it's timely. This, again, ties into this notion that what you're setting out to do is really important and it really matters. So meetings, the work of the meeting has to be meaningful, important, and timely. People have to be recognized and they have to be appreciated for their contributions. It's something you do in meetings all the time, being very cognizant of when people have made some contribution, when somebody has suggested an idea, to be acknowledging it, to validate, to affirm what's going on. In the meeting, you have to attend to things like participation, pace of the meeting, body language. If you're facilitating the meeting, if you are the youth council leader or the task force leader, very important to pay attention to participation. Is everybody participating? And that doesn't mean everybody talking all the time, but it simply means people are participating. They're paying attention, they're contributing, they're listening, they're part of, and part is the key word there. They're part of what's going on. The pace of the meeting is another thing that's really important. And again, this varies with the nature of the work and the nature of the people, and it varies depending on where you are in the country. If you're having a meeting in New York City, the pace is going to be much faster than if you're having a meeting somewhere in a rural southern community. And body language, again, in facilitating a meeting, paying attention not only to what people are saying verbally, but to their body language as well. And every now and again, if you're facilitating a meeting, to really check in. How am I doing as a facilitator or as a chairperson or as a lead person for this group? What are some things I can do to be more effective in my job as the lead person or the chairperson? These are good evaluative questions. They're the kind of questions that will help improve your meetings so that subsequent meetings continue to be more and more valuable for the organization and for the people that participate. So that's a quick thought on meetings that kind of ties this in together. We have some time left. If you have any questions or comments, please do type them into the chat box. I will do my best to respond to them. So that's this. You're again asking for your thoughts and reflections. I would also remind you again that my email address is the bottom of this slide. Again, feel free to contact me anytime after this webinar with any questions or comments. Any way I could be helpful, I would be glad to do that. And I don't see any in the chat box, so I'm going to assume there are no questions at this point in time. So finally, let me just say that this is the slide that Chelsea referred to earlier. If you would like a certificate of completion for this training, what you need to do is to send Chelsea an email. This is her address, and this is the verification code. So you need to include this in your email so she knows this is the webinar training that you completed, and she'll respond to that and get you your certification. So that's what that is about. I want to thank you all for taking this time. I hope that this webinar was relevant and timely for you all. If you have specific questions about your organization or your particular youth council or advisory group, please feel free again to contact me at my email address. And with that, I think we'll wrap it up. I wish you all a great afternoon, and I look forward to the rest of the summer and enjoying it. Take care and have a good day.
looks like we have a question here, Tony.
Oh, sure.
Joseph Pete asks, advisory board reflects all important factors of any board of directions, yes? Directors? I'm sorry, let me repeat that. Advisory board reflects all important factors of any board of directors, yes?
I'm not quite sure the question, but let me interpret it, and I hope I get this somewhere in the ballpark for you. Um, Boards of directors, one of their directors do advise. They advise staff program on all different kinds of issues, so they do give advice. If you bring together an advisory group, you would bring them together for a specific, for more specific kind of advice. As I said, if, for example, if you were considering starting a youth council, well, the board would have some ideas and would give some advice to you about starting a youth council, but you might also want to bring together a small group of young people and ask them whether they think it would be a good idea, ask for their advice about how you would organize such a group, what kind of work that group would do, how you would comprise that group, and so on. And perhaps what might be some obstacles, to getting people to participate. So that's an example that's very specific. So again, just to reiterate, boards do advise. They provide a lot of good advice and direction, and it's around every particular issue. If you have an advisory group, you're really adding to that body of advice, or in terms of expertise, in terms of external voices, and so on. And if I haven't completely got that question correctly, please do send me an email, and I will try to do my best to respond to it more specifically. And thank you for that question, too. Was that the only one, Chelsea?
That is the only question currently. If there are any other questions, please enter those into the chat box. I did get a message back from Joseph Pete saying that's perfect.
Oh, great.
That's answered his question there.
Thank
I do want to take a note take a moment and say, please note that our survey link is there in the chat box. Go ahead and click that link if you have time, 5 minutes to spare today to go ahead and complete that survey. Otherwise, we'll hang tight for just another few minutes for your questions.
Do we have questions?
Doesn't look like we have any questions at this time, Tony. I think it's safe to go ahead and conclude the webinar.
Well, again, thank you all, and thank you, Chelsea, for doing all the technical support in this. I really appreciate it all. And if you do have a thought or a question after we disconnect here, please feel free to connect with me. I'd be glad to respond any way I can. So thank you all again, and have a great afternoon.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.